All he did was ask his neighbor's son to stop cutting through his yard. Within minutes, she was screaming, recording, and calling 911, claiming he was a threat. Blue and red lights painted the perfectly trimmed lawns, flashing against white fences and parked SUVs. It was supposed to be a calm Saturday in Brookhaven Estates, but the neighborhood was holding its breath. 2 police cruisers stood in front of DeAndre Collins's house, engines humming low, as officers spoke with a woman waving her phone, still recording. Her name was Melinda Keene, the kind of neighbor who never missed an HOA meeting, the kind who made sure your garbage cans were at the curb by exactly 7 a.m. She was furious, shaking, saying words that didn't match the quiet, steady man standing across from her. DeAndre wasn't shouting. He wasn't moving. Just standing there, arms at his sides, expression blank but eyes heavy, like someone who had been through this kind of misunderstanding before. "Sir," one officer said. "She's claiming you threatened her." DeAndre let out a dry laugh, not out of humor, but disbelief. "Threatened? Officer, I told her I have video footage of her son destroying my property. That's all I said." Melinda's voice cracked, defensive. "He's a child! You scared him!" The younger officer looked between them, uneasy. The air was thick with tension. Neighbors stood on porches, phones up, recording. You could feel judgment spilling across the street, half whispering, half pretending to care. Then one of the officers asked, "Do you have that footage, sir?" DeAndre nodded and pulled out his phone. His hands didn't shake, not because he wasn't angry, but because he refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing him lose composure. He pressed play. On screen, a teenage boy, Brandon Keene, hopping a small fence, his sneakers kicking up dirt. A garden light toppled. He laughed. Then another light shattered under his heel. He cut across the grass like he owned it, disappearing into his backyard. The officer watched quietly, said nothing, then glanced at Melinda. She blinked, frozen. The wind carried the sound of a sprinkler clicking nearby. He didn't mean to." It was an accident. DeAndre kept his tone level. "He's done it 3 times this week." For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Just the faint buzz of phones recording and the flashing lights bouncing off windshields. Then, slowly, the officers stepped back. "Okay," one said carefully. "No arrests tonight. We'll file a report. This looks like a misunderstanding." Melinda's mouth tightened. "A misunderstanding? He approached my son. He asked him to stop cutting through his yard," the officer said, weary now. "And he has proof." That's when something broke in her composure. She turned away, hands shaking, whispering something under her breath that no one caught. DeAndre stood there for a moment, trying to breathe through the anger that sat like a stone in his chest. Not anger at the police, not even at her, but at how fast things could flip. How his simple act of standing up for himself became a scene with flashing lights and neighbors filming like it was a show. One of the officers walked over. "Sir, I'm sorry about all this. Just try to keep your distance, okay?" DeAndre nodded. "Trust me, officer. That's not gonna be a problem." When the cruisers finally left, the neighborhood started to breathe again. Doors shut, curtains moved. Someone's TV flickered blue light through a window. DeAndre turned toward his porch, shoulders heavy. His wife, Monica, opened the door halfway, eyes full of worry. "You okay?" "Yeah," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. "I'm fine." She stepped closer. "You shouldn't have been out there alone. I didn't do anything wrong." "I know," she said quietly, "but they don't always see it that way." He didn't answer. He just looked back toward the Keene's house. Brandon's bike was still tipped over near their driveway. A half-broken garden light blinked weakly behind him, like it was mocking the whole night. Inside, his kids whispered from the hallway, too curious to hide it. His daughter asked, "Dad, why were the police here?" He crouched down beside her. "Because someone made a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "The kind adults make when they don't listen." That night, DeAndre couldn't sleep. He sat in the living room, scrolling through his phone, trying to let the silence wash away the sound of sirens. But the videos were already up. A neighbor had posted the confrontation in a local Facebook group, captioned, "HOA incident on Cedar Lake Drive. Man yells at teenager." The comments poured in. Some said, "That guy needs to control his temper." Others defended him. Watch the video before you judge. But opinions didn't matter. The damage was already done. By morning, everyone in Brookhaven Estates had a version of the story, and none of them matched. But before it reached that point, it had started small, with a fence, a few garden lights, and a boy who thought rules didn't apply to him. On paper, Brookhaven Estates was the kind of neighborhood people dreamed about. The lawns looked identical, the mailboxes matched, and the HOA newsletter came printed on thick paper with a quote about community harmony at the top. Every Saturday morning, you could see retirees walking small dogs, young families setting up lemonade stands, and lawn mowers humming like background music. But harmony, as DeAndre had learned, was mostly an illusion. It was the kind of peace that held as long as everyone stayed in their lane, mowed their lawns, smiled at the right people, and kept quiet when something bothered them. DeAndre and his wife, Monica, had lived there for 6 years. They'd saved for nearly a decade to buy that house, a 2-story with beige siding, white shutters, and enough space for their kids to have separate rooms. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. And for the most part, they liked their neighbors. Most of them, anyway. Across the street lived Howard and Denise Loomis, retired teachers who waved every morning and brought cookies during the holidays. 2 doors down was Mark Keene, Melinda's husband. Rarely home, always polite when he was. And then there was Melinda herself, an HOA board member with a clipboard for everything, from lawn heights to parking regulations. She had a way of smiling with her mouth, but not her eyes. For a while, DeAndre tried to stay on her good side. He followed every rule, trimmed his hedges, kept his trash cans tucked behind the fence. Still, she found reasons to correct him. Letters about overgrown grass that was a 1/4 inch too tall, or unapproved garden lighting. He'd laugh it off with Monica. "Guess my lights are a threat to the neighborhood aesthetic," he'd say. But underneath the humor, there was a quiet exhaustion. One day he came home from work and saw Melinda standing in front of his yard, pointing her phone toward his house. He rolled down the car window. "Everything okay?" "I'm just taking photos for the HOA report," she said, without looking up. "For what?" "Your mailbox is leaning a bit." He stared at her for a second, unsure if she was joking. "It's a mailbox, not the Leaning Tower of Pisa." She gave a tight smile. "Rules are rules." It was that kind of place. You learned to pick your battles. Still, DeAndre wasn't the type to stir trouble. Most days, he worked remotely, fixing code and managing networks for a logistics company in Raleigh. He liked his quiet routines, morning jogs, coffee with Monica on the porch, and weekends fixing small things around the house. His kids, Kendall and Ari, rode their bikes with other neighborhood kids, including Melinda's son, Brandon. At first, Brandon seemed like a regular teenager, loud but harmless. Then little things started happening. A scratched car door, a missing basketball, footprints through the flower beds. DeAndre didn't say anything, telling himself kids make mistakes. But when the new garden lights started showing up broken, he knew who to suspect. Still, he waited. He wanted proof. He didn't want trouble with Melinda, not after all the small friction over the years. But one night, he checked his security footage out of habit and saw it plain as day. Brandon, headphones in, cutting through the yard and smashing a light without looking back. DeAndre stared at the screen, sighing deeply. Why can't people just teach their kids respect? He muttered. Monica glanced up from the kitchen table. "You saw it?" "Yeah. I think I'll talk to him tomorrow." Calmly. "No yelling. Just be careful," she said, her voice low. "You know how she is." "I'll be polite," he promised. "This isn't about her. It's about right and wrong." The next morning, DeAndre saw Brandon again. Same hoodie, same shortcut through the yard. He stepped outside and waved. "Hey, Brandon, got a second?" The boy stopped, startled. Yeah? Listen," DeAndre said, keeping his voice calm. "I need you to stop cutting through my property. All right? You've broken a few of my lights." Brandon looked down, kicking at the dirt. "I didn't mean to. It's just faster. I get that. But there's a sidewalk for a reason. The kid nodded, eyes darting toward his house. Okay. Sorry, DeAndre smiled faintly. No problem, man. Just respect the space, all right? It could have ended right there. A simple exchange, a simple fix. But things in neighborhoods like Brookhaven rarely stayed simple. That night, DeAndre noticed movement on his camera again. Brandon, cutting across once more, this time glancing at the lens before running off. The next morning, a light lay shattered, glass sparkling across the grass. DeAndre felt his patience crack. It wasn't just about the yard anymore. It was the principle, the quiet disrespect, the feeling of being ignored in a place where he followed every rule. When he told Monica, she sighed. You've been more patient than anyone else would be. Just don't make it worse. He nodded, though he wasn't sure what worse meant anymore. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He just decided to talk to the boy again the next day. But this time, it wouldn't be just Brandon who showed up. It would be his mother, with her phone recording and her mind already made up. The next morning began quietly enough. The kind of morning that made you think the neighborhood really was as peaceful as it looked on the HOA brochure. Birds on the fence, a jogger in a neon vest, the distant hiss of sprinklers. DeAndre was on his porch, coffee in hand, waiting for the world to wake up. But across the street, he saw movement. A flash of grey and red darting between yards. Brandon again. Same hoodie, same shortcut, the same line through his garden like it was a public park. DeAndre put down his cup and sighed. All right, that's enough. He walked across the yard, not fast, not angry, just steady. The boy froze halfway through, mid-step on the grass. Brandon, DeAndre called, keeping his tone calm. You and I already talked about this. Brandon shifted his weight, hands in pockets. I said sorry, didn't I? You did, DeAndre said. But sorry doesn't fix broken lights. It just means you know you did wrong. Brandon shrugged. It's not like it's a big deal. DeAndre looked at the cracked light near his shoe. Maybe not to you, but this yard cost me time and money. And respect goes both ways. There was a pause, the kind where you hope reason might still work. But the boy looked away, mumbling something DeAndre couldn't catch. What was that? I said I'll stop, Brandon muttered. Good, DeAndre replied. That's all I'm asking. He turned to head back toward the house. And that might have been the end of it, if Melinda hadn't stepped out just then. Her voice sliced through the calm. What do you think you're doing? DeAndre turned, startled. She was on her porch, barefoot, phone already in her hand. Her tone wasn't curious. It was accusatory, like she'd walked into a crime scene. Good morning, DeAndre said, trying to stay composed. I was just... Don't you good morning me. Why are you confronting my son? DeAndre blinked. Because your son keeps cutting through my yard and breaking my lights. I've talked to him twice now. Melinda walked closer, still filming. You don't get to talk to my child. You come to me if there's a problem. I tried that last month. Remember? You told me to let boys be boys. Her expression shifted. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said, DeAndre replied. His voice was even, but his patience was thinning. Brandon stepped back, awkwardly, eyes darting between them. Mom, it's not a big deal. Go inside, Brandon, she snapped. Right now. The boy hesitated, then ran up the steps and disappeared inside. Melinda turned back to DeAndre. You scared him. By asking him not to destroy my property. You were standing over him. You had your voice raised. I wasn't yelling, he said flatly. You can check your video. Her lips pressed tight. She lifted her phone higher. You need to stop harassing us or I'll report you to the HOA. DeAndre stared at her, baffled. I've lived here for 6 years, never had a single complaint. You're the one sending notices over mailboxes and flowers. Maybe look at your own behavior. That hit a nerve. Her face reddened. I know your type. You think you can intimidate people. My type? You heard me. Something about the way she said it told him she wasn't talking about homeowners or rule followers. There was more behind those words, something she'd never admit but couldn't hide either. Melinda, he said, his voice lowering. I don't want trouble. I've got proof your son's been trespassing. That's all proof? He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. The video appeared. Brandon laughing as a garden light cracked under his foot, the sound of his music playing through his earbuds. Melinda's face froze. For a split second, the righteous anger faltered, but instead of acknowledging it, she doubled down. "You're recording my child without consent? That's illegal. It's my property. My camera. It's perfectly legal," DeAndre said. She took a step back, her breathing faster now. "You're threatening me." "I'm calling the police." He raised a hand, incredulous. "Threatening you?" "Melinda, I'm standing in my own yard." But she had already turned, phone to her ear. "Yes, I'd like to report a man threatening me and my son," she said loudly enough for the whole block to hear. DeAndre's heart sank. This was spiraling into something ugly. Neighbors were peeking through curtains. One man down the street started walking closer, pretending to check his mail. "Mom, please," DeAndre said quietly. "Don't do this. I haven't touched anyone." Her eyes were wide, wild. "Stay back," she yelled into the phone. "He's getting aggressive." DeAndre took a step back, palms open. "You're lying, and you know it." She ended the call and glared at him. "You'll regret this." He stared for a long moment, then turned to walk home, every step slow, measured. Inside, his chest felt heavy, like he'd just walked into quicksand and didn't know how deep it went. Monica met him at the door, alarmed. "What happened?" She called the police. Her eyes widened. "You're kidding." "No," he said, staring out the window. "They'll be here soon." And they were. 10 minutes later, the flashing lights bathed the houses again. But what the officers saw that night was only half the story. The real chaos was about to begin when the cameras and neighbors got involved. By the time the first police cruiser rolled up, the tension on Brookhaven Lane could have been sliced with a butter knife. Curtains twitched. Garage doors cracked open just enough for people to peek. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood where police visits were common, and that made every second of this feel heavier. DeAndre stood at the edge of his lawn, hands visible, shoulders low. He'd done nothing wrong, but he knew how fast situations like this could twist. He could already hear the murmurs, the whispers carried from porch to porch like wildfire. The officers stepped out. 2 of them. One older, graying at the temples, the other younger, fresh-faced and visibly nervous. "Evening," the senior officer said, his tone cautious. "We got a report of a disturbance." "What's going on here?" Before DeAndre could speak, Melinda raised her voice from across the yard. "He threatened me and my son. He was yelling at us." The younger officer turned toward her. "Ma'am, can you step back for me, please?" She hesitated, then crossed her arms, muttering something about feeling unsafe. DeAndre took a slow breath. "Officers, I didn't threaten anyone. I have security footage showing her son cutting through my yard and damaging property. I just asked him to stop." "That's it." The older officer nodded. "You got that video?" DeAndre held up his phone, playing the clip. Both officers watched. No yelling, no aggression, just a man talking calmly to a teenager who'd clearly done wrong. The boy was laughing as the garden light snapped beneath his shoe. The senior officer exhaled through his nose. "All right," he said quietly. "Doesn't look like you did anything wrong here." Melinda's tone sharpened. "He was recording my child." "Ma'am," the younger cop said gently. "It's on his property. That's allowed." She blinked, thrown off by the lack of backup. "You're just going to let him get away with this?" "There's nothing to get away with," the officer replied. DeAndre kept his voice steady. "I just want this to stop. That's all. Then don't talk to my son again," Melinda snapped. "You don't get to discipline other people's children." "Then make sure your son respects other people's property," DeAndre shot back, his calm finally fraying. The older officer stepped in. "All right, that's enough. Nobody's under arrest. Let's cool things down." But the damage was already done. Cameras were out. A woman across the street was filming from her steps. Another neighbor whispered to her husband, "That's the guy from the HOA letters, isn't it?" Melinda straightened, still trembling but fueled by attention. "I can't believe this." "I'm calling the HOA president. You'll be hearing from us." DeAndre didn't respond. He just turned toward his porch, jaw tight, and walked away. Inside, Monica stood at the window, her expression heavy. "You handled it as best you could," she said quietly. "Doesn't matter," he muttered. "They'll twist it anyway." Their daughter, Kendall, peeked around the corner. "Are the police gone?" "Yeah, sweetheart," DeAndre said. "They're gone." But peace didn't return that night. The following morning, DeAndre woke to his phone buzzing non-stop. Messages, notifications, group chat alerts. One stood out. "You might want to check the neighborhood Facebook group." He clicked the link. There it was, a blurry cell phone video from across the street. The caption read, "Man confronts teen and gets aggressive. Cops called." The footage didn't show the full story. It started midway through the exchange, right when Melinda was yelling, and DeAndre was trying to explain himself. The comments were brutal. "Why's he yelling at a kid? He should have gone through the HOA. People need to learn how to control their temper." But there were defenders, too. "Watch the video. He wasn't yelling." The mom called 911 for no reason. She's playing the victim. Still, it didn't matter which side people were on. What mattered was that everyone now knew. His name, his face, his house, all over social media. Later that afternoon, he saw Brandon biking by, head down, avoiding eye contact. DeAndre wanted to call out, to tell him none of this had to happen. But he didn't. He couldn't risk another misunderstanding. A few houses down, Melinda was standing in her driveway, on the phone again. She turned when she saw him, gave a glare sharp enough to cut glass, and went inside. By evening, an HOA email went out. Reminder: all neighborly disputes should be handled through proper HOA channels. Direct confrontations are strongly discouraged. No names mentioned, but everyone knew who it was about. That night, Monica placed a hand on DeAndre's shoulder. "You did the right thing. People will see that." He stared at the dim glow of the garden, the broken light still lying near the fence. "Maybe," he said softly, "but right now it doesn't feel like it." The next day, a reporter from a local blog reached out, asking if he wanted to share his side. He didn't reply. The story wasn't about going viral. He just wanted fairness and a little peace. But peace doesn't last long when pride, perception, and proof collide. And in Brookhaven, that collision was only getting louder. By Sunday morning, the story had taken on a life of its own. The video from across the street had been reshared dozens of times, first in the neighborhood Facebook group, then on local community pages, and finally by a small online blog under the headline, "HOA Dispute Escalates. Mother Calls Police After Confrontation with Neighbor." They didn't mention names, but everyone in Brookhaven Estates knew exactly who the neighbor was. DeAndre sat at the breakfast table, staring at his phone as the comments stacked up like bricks in a wall. Some people defended him, most didn't. Typical aggressive behavior. He probably scared the poor woman. Why didn't he just call the HOA? Monica walked in, setting down a plate of eggs. "You need to stop reading that." "I'm trying," he said quietly. But it's hard not to. His kids were in the living room, pretending not to listen. They'd seen the lights, heard the yelling. Now their dad was the guy everyone was whispering about. The doorbell rang. DeAndre froze. "You expecting someone?" Monica shook her head. He got up slowly, checked the window. 2 uniformed officers stood on the porch. "Morning," one of them said when he opened the door. "We just wanted to follow up about the incident yesterday." Mrs. Keene filed a statement. DeAndre rubbed his forehead. "A statement for what?" "She said she felt threatened. Said you were yelling and got too close to her son." He let out a bitter laugh. "You saw the video. You know that's not true." "We did," the officer said carefully. "But protocol requires us to check in. We're not pressing charges. We just need both parties to stay clear of each other." "Believe me," DeAndre replied. "That's exactly what I plan to do." After they left, he leaned against the doorframe, staring at the manicured street outside. Every house looked calm, ordinary, but behind those closed doors, he could almost feel the gossip spreading like wildfire. Later that afternoon, he drove to Home Depot to replace the broken garden lights. It should have been a simple errand, but even there, his mind kept circling back. He replayed every moment, every word. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't touched anyone. He'd just asked for respect. And somehow that had turned into a 911 call. When he got back, Monica was sitting on the porch, her phone in hand. She looked up, eyes full of concern. "Melinda just posted on the HOA page." He set down the box of lights. "What now?" "She wrote that she had to protect her child from a hostile neighbor. She said you were confrontational and threatening." DeAndre's stomach sank. "She's painting herself like the victim." Monica nodded. "And people are believing it." He opened his laptop later that evening and pulled up the HOA group post. There it was, her long message written in polite but cutting language, the kind that made her sound calm, composed, even noble. "Yesterday I experienced a deeply upsetting encounter. A male neighbor approached my son aggressively and made me fear for our safety. I had no choice but to call law enforcement underneath." Comments poured in. "Glad you're safe, Melinda. People can be so unpredictable these days. You did the right thing calling the police." DeAndre stared at the screen, fists clenching. He started typing a response, then deleted it. Anything he said would just fuel it more. That night, Monica found him sitting in the living room with the TV off. "You can't let her win by staying silent," she said softly. "I don't want to turn this into a spectacle." She already did. He looked up at her. "What do you want me to say? That I'm angry? I am. That I'm tired of being made into something I'm not? I am. But what good does it do?" Monica sat beside him, resting her hand on his knee. "Maybe the truth isn't loud enough for some people, but it still matters." He gave a small nod. "Maybe." The next morning, DeAndre decided to do something small but symbolic. He replaced every broken garden light, one by one. The sound of the screwdriver twisting into the fresh plastic was oddly calming. He wasn't doing it to prove anything to her. He was doing it for himself. Across the street, Melinda stood on her porch again, phone in hand. She wasn't filming this time, just watching, her expression unreadable. DeAndre glanced up once, then turned back to his work. That afternoon, the HOA president, Robert Gleason, emailed both of them, calling for a special board meeting to address recent community tensions. Monica read the message aloud. "Attendance is mandatory for all parties involved." DeAndre sighed. "Great. Just what I needed." A neighborhood trial. That night, as he turned off the lights, he could still see the faint glow of police headlights in his mind. The flashing reds and blues against the manicured lawns, against the faces of neighbors who never quite knew what they were looking at, only what they wanted to see. But when that HOA meeting came, people would have to pick sides, and the truth would finally have a chance to speak for itself. By Tuesday morning, the story had turned from neighborhood gossip into a full-blown community spectacle. The HOA group chat was flooded. The Facebook post had over 300 comments, and a few residents had even begun arguing publicly at the park. Everyone had an opinion now, even the ones who hadn't seen a single second of the video. DeAndre had become that neighbor, the one everyone whispered about but smiled at in person. Every morning walk to the mailbox felt like walking through a cloud of silent judgment. A few neighbors nodded politely. Others looked away. The fake smiles were worse than the stares. When he stepped outside to take out the trash, he could hear bits of conversation floating through the air. "I heard he got aggressive. She's just protecting her kid. They always make it about something else." He didn't need to hear the rest. He'd learned long ago that people see what they want to see. Monica met him at the front steps with a tablet in her hand. "You're trending on the neighborhood app," she said. He groaned. "You've got to be kidding me." "I wish I was. Someone edited a clip from your security footage, just the part where you're talking to Brandon. They cut it right before you showed her the video." DeAndre rubbed his eyes. "So now it looks like I'm scolding him." "Exactly. And they added text over it that says, 'Man confronts teen aggressively.'" He took the tablet, staring at the footage. It was surreal, watching himself turned into a villain in his own story. A few seconds of video had erased hours of patience, proof, and restraint. "Who posted it?" he asked. "Anonymous account," Monica said. "Probably someone from the HOA circle." He didn't reply. He just set the tablet down and sat on the porch steps, elbows on his knees, staring into the distance. The neighborhood looked the same. Trimmed hedges, flags fluttering, sprinklers ticking in rhythm, but the atmosphere had shifted. It was no longer a community. It was a stage. Across the street, Melinda came out carrying a bag of groceries. She hesitated when she saw him. For a moment, it seemed like she might say something. An apology, maybe even a truce. But instead, she looked away and walked inside without a word. Inside, Monica was pacing. "We can't just sit here," she said. "You need to clear your name before this gets worse." "How?" he asked. "Every time I try to explain, people twist it. They don't care about the truth. They care about the story." "Then tell your own," she said firmly. "Post the full video." He hesitated. "That'll make it blow up even more." "It's already blown up," she said. "At least this way, people will see what really happened." DeAndre sat there in silence for a while, then nodded. "Fine." That night, he uploaded the entire footage, uncut, unedited, time-stamped. He didn't add any captions or dramatic titles. Just the video, with a short message: "This is what actually happened. Make your own judgment." For the first hour, nothing. Then the views started climbing. Dozens, then hundreds. Comments began rolling in, some apologetic, others defensive. "I take back what I said. This guy was calm the whole time. She lied about being threatened. This is why cameras matter." But there was still plenty that refused to budge. "He probably edited it." "Doesn't matter. He shouldn't have spoken to her kid." "Still looks aggressive to me." By midnight, the video had crossed 1,000 views. Monica sat beside him on the couch, scrolling through the comments. "At least people are seeing the truth now," she said softly. "Some are," DeAndre replied. "But truth isn't what people want. They want sides." The next morning, as he left for work, the HOA president, Robert Gleason, was waiting near his mailbox. "We've got that meeting tonight," Robert said. "I'm asking you to keep things calm." DeAndre raised an eyebrow. "Calm? I've been calm since day one," Robert sighed. "I know. But you need to understand, this community, people talk. Emotions are high. Melinda's been here a long time. I've been here 6 years," DeAndre said evenly. "Long enough to deserve the same respect?" Robert nodded, looking uncomfortable. "Just show up, say your piece. Let's get this over with." That evening, the HOA clubhouse parking lot was packed. Every seat was taken, every phone charged and ready to record. DeAndre walked in with Monica beside him, feeling every eye turn his way. Across the room, Melinda sat with her arms crossed, a small army of sympathetic neighbors around her. Robert cleared his throat at the front. "We're here to address the recent incident between 2 residents. Let's keep this civil." The chatter quieted. DeAndre could hear his heartbeat. Melinda spoke first. "I just want to say I never meant for this to go so far, but I did what any mother would do. I protected my son." Robert nodded. "Thank you, Melinda. Now, DeAndre, would you like to respond?" DeAndre stood, steady and deliberate. "I didn't come here to fight. I came here because I believe in fairness. I asked her son to stop damaging my property. That's all. I didn't yell, didn't touch anyone, and I have the footage to prove it." He turned his phone toward the screen. The video played. Clear, calm, undeniable. The room was silent except for the faint crack of the broken light in the footage. When it ended, DeAndre looked up. "All I ever wanted was respect. Not special treatment, just respect." Nobody clapped, nobody booed. But something shifted in the air, a quiet realization that maybe, just maybe, they'd judged too quickly. Melinda sat frozen, jaw tight, eyes darting to the floor. But while the room finally saw the truth, what came next wasn't forgiveness, it was fallout. And it would hit harder than either of them expected. The HOA meeting ended, but the echo of it lingered like humidity in the air. DeAndre and Monica walked home in silence, passing rows of manicured lawns and motionless porch lights. No one waved this time. People just watched, cautious, unreadable, pretending they weren't thinking what they were thinking. Inside their house, Monica dropped her keys on the counter. "You handled yourself perfectly," she said softly. DeAndre loosened his tie. "Doesn't feel like it." Half the room wouldn't even look at me. They saw the video. They know the truth now. Maybe, he said. But knowing and caring aren't the same thing. He sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a mix of anger and fatigue that made his chest feel heavy. It wasn't just about the lights or the HOA anymore. It was about how fragile fairness really was. Across the street, Melinda's house was dark except for the flicker of a TV through the blinds. DeAndre caught himself wondering what she was thinking. Was she embarrassed? Regretful? Or just planning her next move? He didn't have to wait long to find out. The next morning, a thick envelope from the HOA was taped to his front door. Inside was a letter written in Robert Gleason's careful handwriting. Dear Mr. Collins, due to recent community tensions, the board recommends mediation between you and the Keene family. Please refrain from further direct contact in the meantime. He exhaled sharply. Mediation? Like we're two kids on a playground? Monica skimmed the letter. At least it's something. Maybe it'll stop her from spreading more rumors. DeAndre looked out the window. Or maybe it's just their way of keeping her comfortable. He didn't reply to the notice right away. Instead, he spent the rest of the morning mowing the lawn, replacing light bulbs, doing anything that gave his hands something to do, while his mind replayed the last week in endless loops. Later that afternoon, while he was trimming the edge of his lawn, his neighbor Howard walked over. The retired teacher who always wore suspenders and spoke in a low, careful voice. Rough week, huh? Howard said. You could say that. Howard leaned on the fence. For what it's worth, I watched the video. You didn't do anything wrong. DeAndre looked up, surprised. You saw it? Everyone saw it, Howard said. But not everyone wants to admit what it showed. Folks around here like things quiet. Even if quiet means pretending nothing's wrong. DeAndre nodded slowly. Yeah, I'm starting to get that Howard side. You handled yourself better than most would have. Don't let her get under your skin. It was a small gesture, but it meant more than he expected. It reminded him that not everyone in Brookhaven was watching from the shadows. Still, the tension didn't fade. That evening, Brandon came outside to shoot hoops in his driveway. DeAndre heard the sound of the basketball echoing against the concrete, rhythmic, steady, familiar. For a moment, he considered walking over, maybe trying to talk again, but then he saw Melinda appear in the doorway, eyes locked on him. She didn't say a word, but the message was clear. He turned back inside. Dinner was quiet that night. The kids talked about school, about who got picked for the science fair and who didn't. But underneath their chatter, DeAndre could sense they were watching him, measuring his mood like kids do when they're trying to read the air. After dinner, Kendall spoke up softly. Dad? Yeah. Are we in trouble? DeAndre set down his fork. No, baby. We're not in trouble. Then why did the police come here? Monica reached over and touched Kendall's hand. Because sometimes adults make mistakes, and they don't always know how to fix them. Kendall thought for a moment. Did Mrs. Keene make a mistake? DeAndre looked at his daughter, her wide brown eyes full of innocence, and nodded. Yeah, he said quietly. She did. That night, while Monica slept, DeAndre sat alone on the porch. The new garden lights glowed faintly, smooth and untouched. The air was thick and still. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. He opened his phone again and checked the video post. It had stopped trending. People had moved on. No more comments, no more outrage. Just silence. He should have felt relieved, but instead he felt something heavier. That kind of emptiness that comes when you realize the story everyone was obsessed with was your life, and now it's just forgotten debris floating in a digital sea. He looked across the street again. Melinda's porch light was off, but he could see her shadow through the blinds. Maybe she couldn't sleep either. Maybe guilt looked the same from both sides of the street. The next morning, Monica found him still sitting there, eyes red from exhaustion. Come inside, she said softly. You've got to rest. He stood slowly, glancing back one last time at the quiet street that had changed so much in just a few days. But silence doesn't mean peace, and the next HOA meeting would prove that some people would rather protect their pride than face the truth. The HOA clubhouse had never felt so full. Folding chairs lined the back wall, residents stood shoulder to shoulder, and the air buzzed with quiet tension. What was supposed to be a routine meeting about budget updates and landscaping contracts had turned into something else entirely. Everyone knew why they were really there. DeAndre sat near the back beside Monica, hands clasped in his lap. He'd promised himself he wouldn't lose his cool, no matter what was said. But as he scanned the room and saw Melinda sitting front and center, chin high, posture perfect, a printed packet of incident notes in her lap, he knew that promise was about to be tested. Robert Gleason, the HOA president, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat at the podium. "All right, everyone, let's come to order. We'll address regular agenda items first, then move on to the discussion regarding last week's neighborhood dispute." A few people whispered. Someone coughed. No one was really listening to the agenda items. Everyone was waiting for the fireworks. After 15 minutes of procedural talk that barely registered, Robert finally said, "All right, let's move to the matter between Mr. Collins and the Keene family." You could have heard a pin drop. Melinda stood before Robert could even finish. "I'll start," she said, her voice smooth but strained. "I want to make one thing clear. I never wanted this to become public. I was simply protecting my son." She glanced back, meeting a few sympathetic nods. "My son is 16. He made a mistake. He walked through someone's yard. But the way he was approached was inappropriate. No parent wants to see their child intimidated like that." DeAndre kept his gaze steady, jaw tight. Melinda continued, "I've lived in this neighborhood for over 10 years. We've built a strong, respectful community, but lately it feels like people don't understand boundaries, how to communicate properly." "Properly?" someone murmured under their breath. Robert cleared his throat. "Thank you, Melinda. We appreciate your perspective. Now, DeAndre, would you like to respond?" DeAndre stood slowly. Every eye turned toward him. "Sure," he said, his voice calm but deliberate. "I've lived here 6 years. I've paid my dues, followed every rule, fixed everything the HOA's ever written me about, even when the complaint made no sense. I've kept quiet. I've respected everyone here." He took a breath. "But respect goes both ways. My property was damaged multiple times. I asked politely for it to stop. I showed proof. Instead of accountability, I got police lights outside my house." A ripple of whispers moved through the room. Melinda stiffened. "You're exaggerating." DeAndre turned toward her. "Am I? Because I have the footage. I played it for the police. For this board. I even posted it online so no one could twist it." A woman near the front spoke up. "I watched that video." He wasn't yelling. Melinda shot her a glare. "You didn't see what happened before." "There wasn't a before," DeAndre said, his patience cracking. "That's what people like you do. Rewrite what's on camera to protect your pride." Gasps fluttered through the room. Robert raised his hands. "Let's keep this civil." But the floodgate had opened. Another man, Dennis Rowe, spoke from the side. "Look, nobody wants trouble, but let's be honest. Calling 911 over a conversation? That could have ended badly." Melinda's face flushed. "I felt threatened." "How?" Dennis asked. "He never even stepped off his lawn." "I shouldn't have to explain how I feel." She shot back. "You weren't there." DeAndre folded his arms. "Exactly. You felt threatened. You didn't see a threat. There's a difference." The room fell quiet again. It wasn't anger anymore. It was realization. People were thinking. Some uncomfortable, others ashamed. Robert exhaled. "All right, enough back and forth. Here's what I propose. The HOA will arrange mediation between both parties with a neutral third party. We'll also update community guidelines for how disputes should be reported to avoid this kind of situation again." Melinda crossed her arms. "So he faces no consequences?" Robert hesitated. "There's nothing to punish. The evidence doesn't support your claims." For the first time, Melinda's confidence cracked. "You're taking his side." "No," Robert said quietly. "I'm taking the truth's side." The words hung there, heavy and final. DeAndre sat back down, his pulse still high, but his face calm. Monica reached for his hand under the table, giving it a small squeeze. The meeting ended with half-hearted clapping and awkward smiles. People shuffled out quickly, avoiding eye contact, unsure which neighbor to greet first. Outside, as DeAndre and Monica walked to their car, Howard caught up with them. "You handled that perfectly," he said. "I think people finally saw what's really going on." DeAndre shook his head. "Maybe. Or maybe they'll just go home and pretend this never happened." But the story wasn't done yet, because guilt has a way of echoing, and sometimes the apology you never expect comes when no one's watching. 3 days passed before anything else happened. For a while it seemed like the storm had finally quieted. The HOA stopped sending emails, the Facebook thread died down, and neighbors returned to trimming their lawns as if nothing had ever happened. But for DeAndre, the silence didn't bring relief. It brought reflection. He'd won. Technically. The footage cleared him, the board sided with him, and the gossip was dying. But the whole thing had left a mark. Every time he saw a patrol car drive through the subdivision, his stomach tightened. Every time he heard footsteps on the sidewalk, he checked to see who it was. That Friday evening, he was sitting on his porch again, nursing a cup of coffee gone cold, when he saw someone walking across the street. At first he thought it was Howard. Then he realized it was Melinda. She moved hesitantly, almost uncertain of what she was doing, arms folded across her chest. The sun was low, washing the street in gold. Her steps were slow, deliberate, like she'd rehearsed the walk before actually doing it. "Evening," DeAndre said cautiously when she reached the edge of his driveway. "Hi," she said, her voice quieter than he'd ever heard it. "Do you have a minute?" He hesitated, then nodded. Sure. She stayed near the sidewalk, not daring to step closer. For the first time since all of it began, she looked smaller, not in stature, but in spirit. Her eyes were tired, her posture heavy. "I just came to say, I'm sorry," she said. DeAndre studied her face. "For what, exactly?" She swallowed hard. "For everything. For calling the police, for making things worse than they needed to be." He didn't respond right away. "That's a lot to apologize for." "I know," she said quickly, "and I don't expect you to forgive me. I just—" She stopped, glancing back toward her house. "I've had people messaging me non-stop since the meeting, some defending me, others calling me things I never thought I'd hear." DeAndre looked down at his cup. "Welcome to the internet. I deserved some of it," she said quietly. "I let my emotions run ahead of my reason. When I saw you talking to Brandon that day, I assumed the worst. I didn't think. I just reacted." "You didn't just react," DeAndre said softly. "You weaponized fear." Her eyes flicked up, defensive at first. Then she exhaled and nodded. "You're right. I did." They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the faint buzz of a distant lawnmower. "Brandon's been grounded," she said after a while. "He wrote you a note. I told him he needed to understand what his actions caused." She handed over a folded piece of paper. DeAndre opened it. The handwriting was messy, the words short. "I'm sorry for breaking your lights. I didn't mean to cause trouble." He nodded, folding the note back carefully. "He's a good kid. He just needs someone to tell him no." Sometimes Melinda managed a faint smile. "He's stubborn. He gets that from me." DeAndre leaned back against the porch railing. "You know, if you'd just come over and talked like this the first day, none of this would have happened." She looked down. "I know, but I've been on the HOA board so long, I forgot how to be a neighbor." That line hung in the air for a few seconds. Honest. Painful. True. He nodded slowly. "Well, I appreciate you saying this." "I really do." She glanced toward the street. "I've stepped down from the board," she said suddenly. "It didn't feel right after everything." Maybe it's time someone else handled the rules. DeAndre didn't say anything for a while. Then he offered a quiet, "That's probably for the best." Melinda gave a small nod, then turned to leave. Halfway across the street, she stopped and looked back. "You didn't deserve what I did to you." "I just hope one day the people who saw that video forget about me before they forget about you." He didn't answer. There was nothing to say. She went back inside, closing her door gently behind her. For the first time in days, DeAndre felt something other than anger, something that almost resembled peace. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But understanding. That night, he told Monica about the conversation. She listened quietly, then said, "Do you believe her?" "I believe she meant it in the moment," he said. "Whether she changes after that, we'll see." Monica touched his hand. "Sometimes closure doesn't come from justice." It comes from hearing someone finally admit they were wrong, he nodded. Yeah, maybe that's enough. They sat together in the quiet, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the room. Across the street, the Keen's lights flicked off one by one. The next morning, when DeAndre went out to pick up his paper, he saw something new. The broken section of fence between their properties, the one Brandon had cut through so many times, was fixed. Fresh wood, clean paint, no gaps. There was no note, no message, just a quiet gesture. DeAndre smiled faintly, set the paper under his arm, and looked around at the street that had caused him so much stress. The air felt different. Not peaceful yet, but lighter. But even when things begin to heal, the question remains, what do you do when a single misunderstanding exposes how fragile trust really is? A week passed, and the neighborhood began to look normal again, or at least it pretended to. The lawns were freshly mowed, the mailboxes stood straight, and the HOA newsletter went out like clockwork, this time with a cheerful quote about forgiveness strengthening communities. Nobody said who wrote it, but everyone knew. DeAndre read it once and set it aside. He wasn't bitter anymore, just tired. The kind of tired that lives in your bones after you've been fighting to prove something you shouldn't have to prove. Life in Brookhaven Estates moved on, but it wasn't the same. There were quieter waves from neighbors now, softer smiles, a few awkward attempts at friendliness. The people who had avoided him for a week were suddenly warm again. Some even stopped by to make small talk about football or weather, thinly veiled attempts at apology without using the word sorry. He took it all in stride. He didn't hold grudges, but he didn't forget either. One afternoon, while fixing a loose plank on the fence, he saw Brandon again. The kid hesitated on the sidewalk, basketball under one arm. "Hey," DeAndre said. "Hey," Brandon replied quietly. "Thanks for not hating me," DeAndre smiled. "Wasn't worth it. You learned something from it, right?" "Yeah," the boy said, looking down. "Mom told me sometimes grown-ups make mistakes too." DeAndre nodded. "That's true. What matters is what we do after them." Brandon gave a shy grin and went back to shooting hoops in his driveway. It was a simple moment, but one that mattered, maybe more than any meeting or apology could. Inside, Monica was setting the table for dinner. "He talked to you?" she asked. "Yeah, he'll be all right," she smiled faintly. "Maybe everyone will." Later that night, DeAndre sat outside again, just like he had so many nights before, only this time the air felt calm. The lights he'd replaced glowed steady and soft. The street was quiet, not the uneasy kind of quiet that follows tension, but the kind that feels earned. He thought about everything that had happened, the shouting, the flashing lights, the comments online, the whispers, the apology. It was strange how fast things could spiral, how quickly people could choose fear over reason. And all it took was one misunderstanding, one assumption, one sentence said the wrong way. The truth was, it had never really been about a broken garden light. It was about perception. Who's believed first, who's questioned second. And that, DeAndre realized, wasn't just a neighborhood problem. It was a people problem. He leaned back, watching the glow of a porch light flicker across the street. Melinda hadn't spoken to him since their conversation. She didn't have to. Sometimes silence was its own kind of apology. But he hoped she meant what she said. Not for him, but for herself. For her son. Maybe this would be the story that finally made her look at things differently. A car passed slowly, its headlights sweeping over the street like a quiet patrol. DeAndre closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, he felt steady. Howard strolled over from across the street, holding 2 cans of soda. "Mind if I sit?" "Go ahead," DeAndre said with a smile. Howard settled beside him. "You know," he said, cracking open the can, "people like to think neighborhoods are built with fences and contracts. But it's really just people deciding how much they're willing to care." DeAndre nodded slowly. "Yeah, sometimes it takes a mess to remind them of that," Howard chuckled. "Mess or miracle, depends how you look at it." They sat there for a while, sipping in silence, watching the last bit of daylight fade behind the rooftops. Somewhere down the street, a sprinkler hissed to life. It sounded almost peaceful again. After a while, Howard said, "You did good, DeAndre. Most folks would have lost their temper." DeAndre smiled faintly. "Losing your temper feels good for a minute. Keeping your dignity lasts longer." Howard raised his can slightly. "Well said." When the old man left, DeAndre stayed on the porch a bit longer, thinking about what this whole ordeal really meant. It wasn't about winning an argument or proving someone wrong. It was about what people choose to see when they look at each other. How fast assumptions can turn neighbors into enemies, and how a single act of honesty or courage can turn things back around. He thought about his kids, about the kind of world they were inheriting. Maybe it wasn't perfect. Maybe it never would be. But if they learned anything from this, he hoped it was that calm doesn't mean weakness, and truth doesn't need volume to stand on its own. He turned off the porch light, ready to call it a night. The yard looked clean again, peaceful. Across the street, the Keen house was dark except for a soft light in the window, a reminder that people change, even if slowly. As he stepped inside, Monica called from the hallway. "You coming to bed?" "Yeah," he said, taking one last glance at the quiet street. "I think I finally can, because in the end, that's what the story had been about all along, not about fences or lights or HOA rules, but about what happens when people forget to see each other as human. And sometimes it takes the wrong kind of noise to make everyone remember what respect actually sounds like. If this story moved you, take a second to reflect. How would you have reacted if you were in DeAndre's shoes? Subscribe for more real stories that remind us how easily perception can shape truth and how empathy can rebuild what misunderstanding breaks.